5. Please accept my sincerest congratulations, said the director in his unctuous face as he entered Cincinnatus's cell next morning. Roderick Ivanovich seemed even more spruce than usual. The dorsal part of his best frock coat was stuffed with cotton padding like a Russian coachman's, making his back look broad, smooth, and fat. His wig glossy as new. The rich dough of his chin seemed to be powdered with flour, while in his buttonhole there was a pink waxy flower with the speckled mouth. From behind a stately figure, he had stopped on the threshold. The prison employees peeked curiously, also decked out in their Sunday best, also with their hair slicked down. Rodion had even put on some little medal. I am ready. I shall get dressed at once. I knew it would be today. Congratulations, repeated the director, paying no attention to Cincinnatus's jerky agitation. I have the honor to inform you that henceforth you have a neighbor. Yes, he's just moved in. You have grown tired of waiting, I bet. Well, don't worry. Now with a confidant, with a pal to play and work with, you won't find it so dull. And what is more, but this of course must remain strictly between ourselves, I can inform you that permission has come for you to have an interview with your spouse, demain matin. Cincinnatus lay back down on the cot and said, Yes, that's fine, thank you, ragdoll, coachman, painted swine, excuse me, I am a little... Here the walls of the cell started to bulge and dimple like reflections in disturbed water. The director began to ripple. The cot became a boat. Cincinnatus grabbed the side in order to keep his balance, but the oarlock came off in his hand, and neck-deep among 1,000 speckled flowers, he began to swim, got tangled, began sinking. Sleeves rolled up, they started poking him with punting poles and grappling hooks in order to snare him and pull him to the shore. They fished him out. Nerves, a regular little woman, said the prison doctor, alias Roderick Ivanovich, with a smile. Breathe freely, you can eat everything. Do you ever have night sweats? Go on as you are, and if you are very obedient, maybe we shall let you take a quick peek at the new boy. But mind you, only a quick peek. How long that interview? How much time shall we be given? Cincinnatus uttered with difficulty. In a minute. Do not be in such a hurry. Do not get excited. We promise to show him to you, and we will. Put on your slippers, straighten your hair. I think that the director looked interrogatively at Rodion, who nodded. But please observe absolute silence, he again addressed Cincinnatus, and don't grab at anything with your hands. Come, get up. You haven't deserved this. You, my friend, are behaving badly, but still you have the permission. Now, not a word, quiet as a mouse. On tiptoe, balancing with his arms, Roderick Ivanovich left the cell. With him went Cincinnatus in his oversized, shuffling slippers. In the depths of the corridor, Rodion was already stooping at the door with imposing bolts. He had pushed aside the cover of the peephole and was peeping into it. Without turning, he made a motion with his hand, demanding even greater silence, and then imperceptibly changed the gesture into a different, beckoning one. The director rose even higher on tiptoe, and turned with a threatening grimace, but Cincinnatus could not help scraping a little with his feet. Here and there in the semi-darkness of the passageways, the shadowy figures of the prison employees gathered, stooped, shaded their eyes with their hands as if to make out something in the distance. Laboratory assistant Rodion let the boss look through the focused eyepiece. His back emitting a solid squeak, Roderick Ivanovich began to peer in. Meanwhile, in the gray shadows, indistinct figures noiselessly changed their positions, noiselessly summoned each other, formed ranks, and already their many silent feet were working in place like pistons, preparing to step out. At last the director slowly moved away and tugged Cincinnatus lightly by the sleeve, inviting him as a professor would a layman who had dropped in to examine the slide. Cincinnatus meekly placed his eye against the luminous circle. At first he saw only bubbles of sunlight and bands of color, but then it distinguished a cot, identical to the one he had in his cell. Piled nearby were 2 good suitcases with gleaming locks and a large oblong case, like the kind used to carry a trombone. Well, do you see anything? Whispered the director, stooping close to him and reeking of lilies in an open grave. Cincinnatus nodded, even though he did not yet see the main attraction. He shifted his gaze to the left and then really saw something. Seated on a chair, sideways to the table, as still as if he were made of candy, was a beardless little fat man about 30 years old, dressed in old-fashioned but clean and freshly ironed prison pajamas. He was in all stripes, in striped socks, and brand-new Morocco slippers, and revealed a virgin soul as he sat with one stubby leg crossed over the other and clasped his chin with his plump hands. Limpid aquamarine sparkled on the auricular finger. His honey blonde hair was parted in the middle of his remarkably round head, his long eyelashes cast shadows on his cherubic cheek, and the whiteness of his wonderful even teeth gleamed in between his crimson lips. He seemed to be all frosted with gloss, melting just a little in the shaft of the sunlight falling on him from above. There was nothing on the table except an elegant traveling clock encased in a leather case. "That'll do now," whispered the director with a smile. "Me want to looky too." He again attached himself to the bright hull. Rodion indicated by signs to Cincinnatus that it was time to go home. The shadowy figures of the employees were respectfully approaching in single file. Behind the director there was already a whole queue of people waiting to get a look. Some had brought along their eldest sons. "We certainly are spoiling you," muttered Rodion in conclusion, and for a long time was unable to unlock the door of Cincinnatus' cell, even honoring it with a potent bit of Russian swearing which turned the trick. Everything became quiet. Everything was the same as always. "No, not everything. Tomorrow you will come," Cincinnatus said aloud, still trembling from his recent swoon. "What shall I say to you?" he continued, thinking, murmuring, shuddering. "What will you say to me? In spite of everything, I loved you, and will go on loving you, on my knees, with my shoulders drawn back, showing my heels to the headsman and straining my goose neck. Even then, and afterwards, perhaps, most of all afterwards, I shall love you, and one day we will have a real all-embracing explanation, and then perhaps we shall somehow fit together, you and I, and turn ourselves in such a way that we form one pattern and solve the puzzle, draw a line from point A to point B without looking or without lifting the pencil, or in some way we shall connect the points, draw the line, and you and I shall form that unique design for which I yearn. If they do this kind of thing to me every morning, they will get me trained, and I shall become quite wooden." Cincinnatus had a fit of yawning. The tears streamed down his cheeks, and still hump after hump swelled under his palate. It was nerves. He was not sleepy. He had to find something to keep him busy until tomorrow. Fresh books had not yet arrived. He had not returned the catalogue yet. Oh yes, little drawings, but now in the light of tomorrow's interview. A child's hand, undoubtedly Emmy's, had drawn a set of pictures, forming as it had seemed to Cincinnatus yesterday, a coherent narrative, a promise, a sample of fantasy. First there was a horizontal line, that is the stone floor. On it was a rudimentary chair somewhat like an insect, and above was a grating made of 6 squares. Then came the same picture, but with the addition of a full moon, the corners of its mouth drooping sourly beyond the grating. Next, a stool composed of 3 strokes with the eyeless, hence sleeping jailer, on it, and on the floor a ring with 6 keys. The same key ring, only a little larger, with a hand extremely pentadactyl in his short sleeve, reaching for it. Here begins to get interesting. The door is ajar in the next drawing, and beyond it something looking like a bird's spur. All is visible of the freeing prisoner. Then he himself, with commas on his head instead of hair, in a dark little robe represented to the best of the artist's ability by an isosceles triangle. He is being led by a little girl, prong-like legs, wavy skirt, parallel lines of hair. Then the same again, only in the form of a plan. A square for the cell, an angled line for the corridor, with a dotted line indicating the route, and an accordion-like staircase at the end. And finally, the epilogue, the dark tower, above it a pleased moon, with the corners of its mouth curling upward. No, this was only self-deception, nonsense. The child had doodled aimlessly. Let us copy out the titles and lay the catalogue aside. Yes, the child, with the tip of her tongue showing at the right corner of her mouth, tightly holding the stubby pencil, pressing down upon it with a finger white with effort, and then, after connecting a particularly successful line, leaning back, rolling her head this way and that, wrinkling her shoulders, and going back to work on the paper, shifting her tongue to the left corner so painstakingly. Nonsense, let's not dwell on it more. Trying to think of a way to enliven the listless hours, Cincinnatus decided to tidy up for tomorrow's mark. Rodion agreed to haul in another tub like the one in which Cincinnatus had splashed on the eve of the trial. While waiting for the water, Cincinnatus sat down at the table. Today the table was a little wobbly. "The interview," wrote Cincinnatus, "signifies in all probability that my terrible morning is already nearing. The day after tomorrow, at this very time, my cell will be empty, but I am happy that I shall see you. We used to go up to the workshops by 2 different staircases, the men by one, the women by the other, but would meet on the penultimate landing. No longer can I conjure Martha as she was when I first met her, but I can recall having noticed at once, when she opens her mouth, a little an instant before laughing, and the round hazel eyes, and the coral earrings. Oh, how I should like to reproduce her as she was, all new and still solid. And then the gradual softening, the fold between the cheek and neck when she turned her head toward me, already grown warm, almost alive. Her world consists of simple components, simply joined. I think that the simplest cookbook recipe is more complicated than the world that she bakes as she hums. Every day for herself, for me, for everyone, but whence, even then, in the first days, whence the malice and obstinacy that suddenly, so soft, so amusing and warm, and then suddenly, at first I thought she was doing it deliberately, perhaps to show how another in her place might have grown shrewish and stubborn. Can you imagine my amazement when I realized that this was her real self? Because of what trifles, my foolish one, how your little head was. If one feels through all that auburn, thick mass to which she knows how to impart an innocent sleekness with a girlish gloss on the top of her head, your little wife looks so quiet and gentle, but she bites, I tell you. Her first unforgettable lover said to me, and the base thing is that the verb was not being used figuratively, because it was true that at a certain moment one of those memories that one should drive away, or else it will overpower and crush you. Little Marthe did it again. And once I saw from the balcony, I saw, and since the day I would never enter any room without first announcing my approach from afar by a cough or a meaningless exclamation. How awful it was to glimpse that contortion, that breathless haste, all that had been mine in the shadowed seclusion of the Tamara Gardens, all that I had afterward bucket in the tub. Afterward lost. Count how many she had endless torture to talk at dinner, or with one or another of her lovers, appear cheerful, crack nuts, crack jokes, and all the while to be mortally afraid to bend down and chance to see the nether half of that monster, whose upper half was quite presentable, having the appearance of a young woman and a young man visible down to the waist at the table, peacefully feeding and chatting, whose nether half was a writhing, raging quadruped. I descended into hell to retrieve a dropped napkin. Later, Marthe would say of herself in that same first-person plural, "We are very much ashamed that we were seen and pouted, and still I love you, inescapably, fatally, incurably. As long as the oaks stand in those gardens, I will. When they gave you official proof that I was not wanted, that I was to be shunned, you were surprised that you had noticed the thing yourself, and yet it was so easy to hide it from you. I remember how you employed me to reform with no real understanding what was in me that ought to be reformed, and how one would go about it, and even now you do not understand anything. Do not for a moment stop to think whether you understand or not, and when you wonder, your wonder is almost cozy. Still, when the bailiff began going around the courtroom with a hat, you threw in your scrap of paper. As the tub rocked at a wharf, an innocent, gay, inviting stream rose above it. Impulsively, in two quick motions, Cincinnatus heaved a sigh and laid aside the filled sheets. From his modest footlocker he produced a clean towel. Cincinnatus was so small and slender that he was able to get all of himself into the washing tub. He sat there as in a canoe and floated peacefully. A reddish evening ray, mingling with the steam, aroused a motley tremor in the small world of the stone cell. Reaching shore, Cincinnatus stood up and stepped onto land. As he dried himself, he struggled with dizziness and palpitations. He was very thin, and now, as the light of the setting sun exaggerated the shadows of his ribs, the very structure of his rib cage seemed a triumph of cryptic coloration, inasmuch as it expressed the bared nature of his surroundings, of his guile. My poor little Cincinnatus, as he dried himself, trying to find some diversion in his own body, he kept examining his veins, and he could not help thinking how he would soon be uncorked, and all the contents would run out. His bones were light and thin, his meek toenails, you dear ones, you innocent ones, gazed up at him with childlike attention, and as he sat thus on the cot, naked, his entire skinny back, from coccyx to cervical vertebrae, exposed to the observers on the other side of the door, he could hear whispers, rustling movements, a discussion or something of other. But never mind, let them look. Cincinnatus might have passed for a sickly youth, even the back of his head, with his hollowed nape and tuft of wet hair, and it's boyish, exceptionally handy. From the same ballast, Cincinnatus took a small mirror and a vial of depilatory water, which always reminded him of that marvelously hirsute mole which Marthe had on her side. He rubbed it into his prickly cheeks, removing the prickliness and carefully avoiding the mustache. Nice and clean now. He heaved a sigh and put on the cool nightshirt, still smelling of home washing. It grew dark. He lay in bed and kept floating. At the customary hour, Rodion turned on the light and removed the bucket and the tub. The spiral loaded itself to him on a thread and settled on the finger which Rodion offered to the furry beastie, chatting with it as with a canary. Meanwhile, the door of the corridor remained ajar, and all at once something stirred there. For an instant the twining tips of the pale curls drooped, and then disappeared. Twinning tips of the pale curls drooped, and then disappeared when Rodion moved as he gazed up at the tiny black aerialist receding up under the circus dome. The door still remained a quarter of the halfway open. Heavy Rodion, with his leather apron and his crinkly red beard, lumbered out of the cell, and when the clock, now closer now because of the direct communication, began its hoarse rattle prior to striking, he produced a thick watch from a recess in his belt and checked the time. Then, supposing Cincinnatus to be asleep, he watched him for a rather long time, leaning on his broom as on a halberd. Having reached who knows what conclusions, he moved again. Just then, silently and not very fast, a red and blue ball rolled in through the door, followed one leg in a right triangle straight under the cot, disappeared for an instant, thumped against the chamber pot, and rolled out along the other cathetus, that is, toward Rodion, who, all without noticing it, happened to kick it as he took a step. Then, following the hypotenuse, the ball departed into the same chink through which it had entered. Shouldering the broom, Rodion left the cell. The light went out. Cincinnatus did not sleep, did not sleep, did not sleep. No, he was asleep, but with a moan scrambled out again, and now again he did not sleep, slept, did not sleep, and everything was jumbled. Marthe, the executioner's block, her velvet. How it will turn out. Which will it be? A beheading or a tryst? Everything merged totally. But he did open his eyes for just one more wink, and then the light went on, and Rodion entered on tiptoe, took the catalogue and its black binding from the table, went out, and it became dark. Six. What was it, though everything terrible, nocturnal, unwieldy? What was that thing? It had been last to move aside, reluctantly yielding to the huge, heavy wagons of sleep, and now it was the first to hurry back, so pleasant, so very pleasant, swelling, growing more distinct, suffusing his heart with warmth. Marthe is coming today. Just then Rodion brought a lilac letter on the salver, as they do in plays. Cincinnatus perched on the bed and read the following: "A million apologies, an inexcusable blunder. Upon consulting the text of the law, it was discovered that an interview is granted only upon expiration of 1 week following the trial. Hence we shall postpone it until tomorrow. Best of health, old boy, regards. Everything the same here, one worry after another. The paint set for the sentry boxes again turned out to be worthless, about which I had already written, but without results." Rodion, trying not to look at Cincinnatus, was gathering yesterday's dishes from the table. It must be a dreary day. The light penetrating from above was gray and compassionate. Rodion's dark leather clothes seemed damp and stiff. "Oh, well," said Cincinnatus, as you wish, I am powerless anyway." The other Cincinnatus, a little smaller, was crying, all curled up in a ball. "All right, let it be tomorrow, but I should like to ask you to call." "Right away," blurted out Rodion with such alacrity that he seemed to have been longing just for this. He was about to dash off, but just then the director, who had been waiting too impatiently at the door, appeared just a split second too early, so that they collided. Roderick Ivanovich was holding a wall calendar and did not know where to lay it down. "A million apologies," he cried. "An inexcusable blunder." Upon consulting the text of the law, having repeated his message verbatim, Roderick Ivanovich seated himself at Cincinnatus's feet and added hurriedly, "In any case you may submit a complaint, but I consider it my duty to warn you that the next Congress will take place in the fall, and by then a lot of water, not only water, will have flowed over the dam. Do I make myself clear?" "I do not intend to complain," said Cincinnatus, "but I wish to ask you, is there in the so-called order of so-called things in which your so-called world consists, even one thing that might be considered an assurance that you will keep a promise?" "A promise?" asked the director in surprise, ceasing to fan himself with the cardboard part of the calendar depicting the fortress at sunset, a watercolor. "What promise?" "That my wife will come tomorrow. So you will not agree to guarantee it in this case, but I am phrasing my question more broadly. Is there in this world, can there be, any kind of security at all, any pledge of anything, or is the very idea of a guarantee unknown here?" A pause. Isn't it too bad, though, about Roman Vissarionovich, said the director. Have you heard? He is in bed with a cold, and apparently quite a serious one. I have a feeling that you will not answer me at any cost. That is logical, for even irresponsibility, in the end, develops its own logic. For 30 years I have lived among specters that appear solid to the touch, concealing from them the fact that I am alive and real. But now that I have been caught, there is no reason to be constrained with you. At least I shall test for myself all the unsubstantiality of this world of yours. The director cleared his throat and went on as if nothing had happened, so serious, in fact, that as a doctor, I am not certain whether he will be able to attend, that is, whether he will recover in time, whether he will be able to make it to your show. Go away, said Cincinnatus through clenched teeth. Do not be crestfallen, continued the director. Tomorrow, the thing you dream of will become a reality. It's a cute calendar, though, isn't it? A work of art. No, this isn't for you. Cincinnatus closed his eyes. Then he opened them again. The director was standing in the center of the cell with his back toward him. The leather apron and red beard, apparently left by Rodion, were still cluttering the chair. Today we shall have to do a particularly good job of cleaning up your abode, he said without turning, so as to prepare it for tomorrow's interview. While we are washing the floor in here, I shall ask you to, Cincinnatus shut his eyes again, and the voice, grown smaller in volume, went on, I shall ask you to step out into the corridor. It will not take long. Let us make a real effort so that tomorrow, in a fitting manner, neatly, smartly, festively, get out, said Cincinnatus, raising himself and shaking all over. Quite impossible, Rodion announced gravely, fussing with his apron straps. We must do some work here. Just look at all the dust. You'll say thank you yourself. He inspected himself in a pocket mirror, fluffed up the whiskers of his cheeks, and at last, approaching the cot, handed Cincinnatus his things. The slippers were providently stuffed with wadded paper, while the hem of the dressing gown was carefully folded back and pinned. Cincinnatus, a bit unsteady on his feet, got dressed, and leaning a little on his arm of Rodion, went out into the corridor. There he sat down on a stool, folding his arms into his sleeves like a sick man. Leaving the door of the ward wide open, Rodion began cleaning. The chair was placed atop the table. The sheet was stripped from the cot, and the pail handle clinked. The draft riffled through the papers on the table, and the one sheet glided to the floor. What are you moping about there? Shouted Rodion, raising his voice above the noise of the water, the sloshing and the clatter. You ought to take a bit of a walk along the corridors there. Go on, don't be afraid. I'll be right here in case anything happens. All you have to do is holler. Cincinnatus obediently rose up from the stool. But hardly had he moved along the cold wall, undoubtedly related to the rock on which the fortress had risen. Barely had he walked a few steps away, and what steps, feeble, weightless, meek. Barely had he consigned Rodion the open door, the pails to the receding perspective, when Cincinnatus felt the surge of freedom. It flowed more fully when he turned the corner. Except for the sweaty smears and the cracks, the bare walls were adorned by nothing. Only in one place someone had scrawled in ochre, with a house painter's stroke, testing brush, with the ugly run of paint under it. From the unaccustomed exertion of walking alone, Cincinnatus's muscles grew limp, and there was a stitch in his side. It was then that Cincinnatus stopped, and looking around him as if he had just entered this stony solitude, summoned up all his will, evoked the full extent of his life, and endeavored to comprehend his situation with the utmost exactitude. Accused of the most terrible of crimes, gnostical turpitude, so rare and so unutterable that it was necessary to use circumlocutions like impenetrability, opacity, occlusion, sentenced for that crime to death by beheading, imprisoned in the fortress of an expectation of the unknown but near and inexorable date, which he distinctly anticipated as the wrenching, yanking, and crunch of a monstrous tooth, his whole body being the inflamed gum, his head that tooth, standing now in the prison corridor with a sinking heart, still alive, still unimpaired, still Cincinnatus C. Felt a fierce longing for freedom, the most ordinary physically feasible kind of freedom, and instantly he imagined with such sensuous clarity, as though it was all a fluctuating corona emanating from him, the town beyond the shallowed river, the town from every point of which one could see, now in this vista, now in that, now in crayon, now in ink, the tall fortress within which he was, and so powerful and sweet was this tide of freedom, that everything seemed better than it really was. His gaolers, who in fact were everyone, seemed more tractable. In the confining phenomena of his life, reason sought out a possible trail. Some kind of vision danced before his eyes, like 1,000 iridescent needles of light surrounded the dazzling reflection of the sun in nickel-plated sphere. Standing in the prison corridor and listening to the ample sonorities of the clock, which had just begun its leisurely enumeration, he imagined life in the city as it generally was at this fresh morning hour. Marthe, eyes lowered, is walking with an empty basket from the house along the blue sidewalk, followed at a distance of 3 paces by a dark mustachioed young blade. The electric wagonettes in the shape of swans or gondolas where you sit as in a carousel cradle, gliding in an endless stream along the boulevard. Couches and armchairs are being carried out of furniture warehouses for airing, and passing school children sit down on them to rest, while the little orderly, his wheelbarrow loaded with all their books, mops his brow like a full-grown laborer. Spring-powdered and two-seat clocklets, as they are called here in the provinces, click along over their freshly sprinkled pavement, and to think that these are the degenerate descendants of the machines of the past, of those splendid, lacquered, streamlined automobiles. What made me think of that? I guess the photos in the magazine. Marthe picks out some fruit, decrepit, dreadful horses, which have long since ceased to marvel at the sights of hell, deliver merchandise from the factories to the city distributors. Street bread vendors, white-shirted, with gilded faces, shout as they juggle their baton loaves, tossing them high in the air, catching them and twirling them once again. At a window overgrown with wisteria, a gay foursome of telegraph workers are clinking glasses and drinking toasts to the health of passers-by. A famed punster, a gluttonous, coxcombed old man in red silk trousers, is gorging himself on fried chuckricks. At a pavilion in the lesser ponds, the clouds disperse, and to the accompaniment of a brass band, dappled sunlight runs along the sloping streets and visits the side alleys. Pedestrians walk briskly. The smell of lindens of carburing and the damp gravel is in the air. The perpetual fountain at the mausoleum of Captain Somnus profusely irrigates with its spray the stone captain, the bas-relief at his elephantine feet, and the quivering roses. Marthe, her eyes lowered, is walking homeward with a full basket, followed at a distance of 3 paces by a fair-haired fop. These are the things that Cincinnatus saw and heard through the walls as the clock struck, and even though in reality everything in the city was always quite dead and awful by comparison with the secret life of Cincinnatus and his guilty flame, even though he knew this perfectly well, and knew also that there was no hope, yet at this moment he still longed to be on those brightly familiar streets. But then the clock finished shrinking, the imaginary sky grew overcast, and the jail was back in force. Cincinnatus held his breath, moved, stopped again, listened. Somewhere ahead at the indeterminate distance there was a tapping. It was a rhythmic, quick, blunt sound, and Cincinnatus, all his nerves aflutter, heard in it an invitation. He walked on, very attentive, very ethereal and lucid. He turned he knew not how many corners. The noise ceased, but then seemed to have flown nearer, like an invisible woodpecker. Tap, tap, tap. Cincinnatus quickened his pace, and once again the dark passage made a bend. Suddenly it became lighter, though still not like the day, and now the noise became definite and almost smug. Ahead, in a flood of pale light, Emmy was bouncing a ball against the wall. At this point the passage was wide, and at first seemed to Cincinnatus that the left wall contained a large, deep window, through which all that strange additional light was flowing. Emmy, as she bent down to retrieve her ball, and at the same time to pull up her sock, looked at him slyly and shyly. The little blonde hair stood erect on her bare arms and chins. Her eyes shone between her whitish lashes. Now she straightened up, brushing the flaxen curls from her face with the same hand in which she was holding the ball. "You aren't supposed to walk here," she said. She had something in her mouth. It rolled behind her cheek and knocked against her teeth. "What is that you are sucking?" asked Cincinnatus. Emmy stuck out her tongue. On its independently live tip lay a piece of brilliant, barberry red hard candy. "I have some more," she said. "Want one?" Cincinnatus shook his head. "You aren't supposed to walk here," repeated Emmy. "Why?" asked Cincinnatus. She shrugged one shoulder and, grimacing, arching the hand in which she held the ball, tensing her calves, she went over to the spot where he had thought there was a niche, a window, and fidgeting, suddenly seeming all legs, settled herself on a sill-like projection of stone. No, it was only the semblance of a window. Actually, it was a glazed recess, a showcase, and it displayed in its false depth. Yes, of course, how could one help but recognize it? A view of the Tamara Gardens. This landscape, daubed in several layers of distance, executed in blurry green hues and illuminated by concealed bulbs, was reminiscent not so much of a terrarium or some model of the theatrical scenery as the backdrop in front of which a wind orchestra toils and puffs. Everything was reproduced fairly accurately as far as grouping and perspective was concerned, and were it not for the drab colors, the stirless tree-tops, and the torpid lighting, one could slit one's eyes and imagine oneself gazing through an embrasure from this very prison at those very gardens. The indulgent gaze recognized those avenues, that curly verdancy of groves, the portico at right, the detached poplars in the middle of the unconvincing blue of the lake, the pale blob that was probably a swan. Afar, a stylized mist, the hills humped their round backs, and above them, in that kind of state-blue firmament under which Thespians live and die, cumulus clouds stood still. On all of this was somehow not fresh, antiquated, covered with dust, and the glass through which Cincinnatus was looking bore smudges, and from some of which a child's hand could be reconstructed. "Won't you please take me out there?" whispered Cincinnatus. "I beseech you." He was sitting next to Ivy on the stone projection, and both of them were peering into the artificial remoteness beyond the glass. Enigmatically, she kept following the winding paths with her finger, and her hair smelled of vanilla. "Pop's coming," she suddenly said in a husky, hurried voice. Then she hopped to the floor and vanished. It was true. Rodion was approaching. Keys a jangle from the direction opposite the one whence Cincinnatus had come, who thought for a moment it was a reflection in a mirror. "Home you go," he said jokingly. The light behind the glass went out, and Cincinnatus took a step, intending to return by the same route as he had come. "Hey, where are you off to?" exclaimed Rodion. "Go straight, it's shorter that way." And only then did Cincinnatus realize the bends in the corridor had not been leading him away anywhere, but rather formed a great polyhedron. For now, as he turned a corner, he saw his door in the distance, and before he reached it, passed the cell where the new prisoner was kept. The door of his cell was wide open, and inside, the likable shorty whom he had seen before, dressed in his striped pajamas, was standing on a chair, tacking the calendar to the wall. Tap, tap, like a woodpecker. "No peeking, my fair damsel," said Rodion good-naturedly to Cincinnatus. "Home, home, and what a cleaning job we've done to your place, eh? Now we don't have to be ashamed about bringing guests in." He seemed particularly proud of the fact that the spider was enthroned in a clean, impeccably correct web, which had been created, it was clear, just a moment before. 7. An enchanting morning, freely without the former friction. It penetrated through the barred glass washed yesterday by Rodion. Nothing could look more festive than the yellow paint on the walls. The table was covered by a clean tablecloth which did not yet cling because of the air under it. The liberally doused stone floor exhaled frontal freshness. Cincinnatus put on the best clothes he had with him, and while he was pulling on the white silk stockings, which he as a teacher was entitled to wear at gala performances, Rodion brought in a wet cut-glass vase with jowly peonies from the director's garden, and placed it on the table in the center. No, not quite in the center. He backed out, and in a minute returned with a stool and an additional chair, and arranged the furniture not haphazardly, but with judgment and taste. He came back several times, and Cincinnatus did not dare ask, "Will it be soon?" And as happens at a particularly inactive hour, when all dressed up you are awaiting guests, he strolled around, now perching in unaccustomed quarters, now straightening the flowers in the vase, so that at last Rodion took pity on him and said that it would not be long now. Punctually at 10, Roderick Ivanovich appeared in his best, most monumental frock coat, pompous, aloof, excited yet composed. He set down a massive ashtray and inspected everything, with the exception only of Cincinnatus, acting like a majordomo engrossed in his job, who gives his attention to the neatness and inanimate inventory only, leaving the animate to shift for themselves. He returned carrying a green flask equipped with a rubber bulb, and began spraying pine fragrance rather unceremoniously, pushing aside Cincinnatus when the latter happened to get in his way. The chairs Roderick Ivanovich arranged differently from Rodion. For a long time he stared goggle-eyed at the backs, which did not match. One was lyrate, the other square. He puffed up his cheeks and let out the air with a whistle, and at last turned to Cincinnatus. "And how about you? Are you ready?" he asked. "Did you find everything you needed? Are your shoe buckles in order? Why is it wrinkled or something over there? Shame on you! Let's see your paws. Boom! Now try not to get all dirty. I think it won't be long now." He went out, and his succulent, authoritative bass reverberated through the corridor. Rodion opened the cell door, securing it in that position, and unrolled a caramel-striped runner on the threshold. "Coming," he whispered with a wink, and disappeared again. Now a key made threefold clank in a lock somewhere. Confused voices were audible, and a gust stirred the hair on Cincinnatus's head. He was very agitated, and his quivering lips continuously assumed the shape of a smile. "Right this way. Here we are already." He could hear the sonorous comments of the director, and in the next instant the latter appeared, gallantly leading in by the elbow the plump, striped little prisoner, who before coming in paused on the mat, noiselessly brought together his morocco feet, and bowed gracefully. "Allow me to present you, Monsieur Pierre," said the director to Cincinnatus in jubilant tones. Come in, Monsieur Pierre. You can't imagine how you have been awaited here. Get acquainted, gentlemen. The long-awaited meeting, an instructive spectacle. Do bear with us, Monsieur Pierre. Do not find fault." He did not even know what he was saying. He was bubbling over, cutting heavy little capers, rubbing his hands, bursting with delighted embarrassment. Monsieur Pierre, very calm and composed, walked in, bowed once again, and Cincinnatus mechanically joined him in a handshake. The other man retained Cincinnatus's escaping fingers, and his small soft paw a second longer than is customary, as a gentle elderly doctor draws out a handshake so gently, so appetizingly, and now he released it. In a melodious, high-pitched voice coming from the throat, Monsieur Pierre said, "I, too, am extremely happy to make your acquaintance at last. I make bold to hope that we may get to know each other more closely." Exactly, roared the director. "Oh, please be seated. Make yourself at home. Your colleague is so happy to see you here that he is at a loss for words." Monsieur Pierre seated himself, and here it became evident that his legs did not quite reach the floor. However, this did not detract in the least from his dignity, or that particular grace with which the nature endows a few select fat men. His crystal bright eyes gazed politely at Cincinnatus's, while Roderick Ivanovich, who had also sat down at the table, tittering, urging, intoxicated with pleasure, looked from one to the other, greedily following the impression made on Cincinnatus by the guest's every word. Monsieur Pierre said, "You bear an extraordinary resemblance to your mother. I myself have never had the chance of seeing her, but Roderick Ivanovich kindly promised to show me her photograph." "At your service," said the director. "We'll obtain one for you." Monsieur Pierre continued, "Anyway, apart from this, I have been a photography enthusiast ever since I was young. I am 30 now, and you?" "He is exactly 30, said the director. "You see, I guessed right, so since this is your hobby too, let me show you." Briskly he produced from the beast's breast pocket of his pajama top a bulging wallet, and from it the thick batch of home snapshots of the smallest size. Rifling through them as through a deck of tiny cards, he began placing them one by one on the table, and Roderick Ivanovich would grab each with delighted exclamations, examine it for a long time, and slowly, still admiring the snapshot, or else reaching for the next, would pass it on, even though all was still and silent there. The pictures showed Monsieur Pierre in various poses, now in a garden with a giant prize tomato in his hand, now perching with one buttock on some railing, profile with pipe, now reading in a rocking chair, a glass with a straw standing near him. "Excellent, marvelous," Roderick Ivanovich would comment, fawning, shaking his head, feasting his eyes on every shot, or else holding two at a time and shifting his gaze from one to the other. My, what biceps you have in this one. Who would think, with your graceful physique? Overwhelming, how charming. Talking with little birdie. A pet, said Monsieur Pierre. Most entertaining. What do you know? And this here, eating a watermelon, no less. Yep, said Monsieur Pierre. You have already looked through some of those. Here are some more. Charming, let me tell you. Let's have that other batch. He hasn't seen them yet. Here I am juggling 3 apples, said Monsieur Pierre. Isn't that something, said the director, clucking his tongue. At breakfast, said Monsieur Pierre. This is me, and that is my late father. Yes, of course I recognize him, that noble brow. By the banks of the Strop, said Monsieur Pierre. Have you been there? He asked, turning to Cincinnatus. I don't think he has, replied Roderick Ivanovich. And where was this taken? What an elegant little overcoat. You know something, you look older in this one. Just a second, I want to see that one again with the watering can. There, that is all I have with me, said Monsieur Pierre, and again addressed Cincinnatus. If only I had known that you are so interested, I would have brought along more. I have a good dozen albums. Wonderful, stunning, repeated Roderick Ivanovich, wiping with lilac-colored handkerchief, his eyes gown moist from all those joyous titters and ejaculations. Monsieur Pierre resembled the contents of his wallet. Suddenly there was a deck of cards in his hands. Think of a card, please, any card, he proposed, laying the cards out on the table. He pushed the ashtray aside with his elbow. He continued laying. We have thought of one, said the director jauntily. Indulging in a bit of hocus-pocus, Monsieur Pierre put his index finger to his forehead, then quickly gathered up the cards, smartly made the pack crackle, and threw out a tray of spades. This is amazing, exclaimed the director. Simply amazing. The deck vanished just as suddenly as it had appeared, and making an imperturbable face, Monsieur Pierre said, This little old woman comes to the doctor and says, I have a terrible malady, Mr. Doctor. She says, I have an awful fright. I'll die of it. And what are the symptoms? My head shakes, Mr. Doctor, and Monsieur Pierre, mumbling and shaking, imitated the little old woman. Vladimir Ivanovich burst into riotous mirth, struck the table with his fist, nearly fell off his chair, and had a fit of coughing, moaned, and with a great effort regained control of himself. Monsieur Pierre, you are the life of the party, he said, still shedding tears. Truly the life of the party. I haven't heard such a hilarious incident in all my life. How melancholy we are, how tender, said Monsieur Pierre to Cincinnatus, thrusting out his lips as if he were trying to make a sulking child laugh. We keep so still, and our little mustache is all quivering, and the vein on our neck is throbbing, and our little eyes are misty. It's all from joy, quickly inserted the director. Nine fits pass attention. Yes, and indeed a happy day, red-letter day, said Monsieur Pierre. I am bubbling over with the excitement myself. I don't want to boast, but in me, my dear colleague, you will find a rare combination of outward sociability and inward delicacy, an art of the causerie, and the ability to keep silent, playfulness and seriousness. Who will console a sobbing infant, and glue his broken toy together? Monsieur Pierre. Who will intercede for a poor widow? Monsieur Pierre. Who will provide sober advice? Who will recommend a medicine? Who will bring glad tidings? Who? Monsieur Pierre. And all will be done by Monsieur Pierre. Remarkable, what talent, exclaimed the director, as though he had been listening to poetry. Yet all the time from beneath a twitching eyebrow he kept glancing at Cincinnatus. Therefore it seems to me, went on Monsieur Pierre. Oh yes, by the way, he interrupted himself. Are you satisfied with your quarters? You are not cold? And I give you enough to eat? He gets the same as I, answered Vladimir Ivanovich. The board is excellent. All aboard, quipped Monsieur Pierre. The director was getting ready to roar again, but just then the door opened and the gloomy, lanky librarian appeared with a stack of books under his arm, a woolen scarf round his throat. Without saying hello to anyone, he dumped the books on the cotton. For a moment, stereometric apparitions of those same books, composed of dust, hung above them in the air. They hung, vibrated, and dispersed. Wait a minute, said Vladimir Ivanovich. I don't think you have met. The librarian nodded without looking. With polite Monsieur Pierre rose from his chair. Please, Monsieur Pierre, begged the director, putting his hand to his shirt front. Please show him your trick. Oh, it's hardly worth it. It's really nothing, Monsieur Pierre modestly began, but the director would not stop. It's a miracle, red magic. We all beg you. Oh, do it for us. Wait just a moment. He shouted to the librarian, who was already starting toward the door. Just a minute. Monsieur Pierre will show you something. Please, please, don't go. Think of one of those cards, pronounced Monsieur Pierre with a mock solemnity. He shuffled the deck, threw out the 5 of spades. No, said the librarian, and left. Monsieur Pierre shrugged a round little shoulder. I'll be right back, muttered the director, and went out also. Cincinnatus and his guest remained alone. Cincinnatus opened a book and buried himself in it. That is, he kept reading the first sentence over and over. Monsieur Pierre looked at him with a kind smile, with one little paw lying palm up on the table, just as if he were offering to make peace with Cincinnatus. The director returned. In his tightly clenched fist was a woolen scarf. Maybe you can use it, Monsieur Pierre, he said. Then he handed over the scarf, sat down, exhaled noisily like a horse, and began examining his thumb, from the end of which a half-broken nail protruded like a sickle. What were we talking about? Exclaimed Monsieur Pierre with a charming tact, just as if nothing had happened. Yes, we were talking about photographs. Sometime I'll bring my camera and take your picture. That will be fun. What are you reading? May I take a look? You ought to put the book aside, remarked the director with a rasp of exasperation in his voice. After all, you do have a guest. Oh, let him be, smiled Monsieur Pierre. There was a pause. It is growing late, said the director, after consulting his watch. Yes, we'll be going in a minute. My, what a little grouch. Look at him, his little lips all a-tremble. Any moment now the sun will peek out from behind the clouds. Grouch, grouch. Let's go, said the director, rising. Just a moment. I like it so much here that I can hardly tear myself away. In any case, my dear neighbor, I shall take advantage of your permission to visit you often. That is, of course, if you grant me permission, and you will, won't you? Goodbye for now, then. Goodbye. Bowing comically in imitation of someone, Monsieur Pierre withdrew. The director once again took him by his elbow, emitting voluptuous nasal sounds. They left, but at the last minute his voice was heard to say, "Excuse me, I forgot something. I'll catch up with you in a moment." The director gushed back into the cell. He approached Cincinnatus, and for an instant the smile left his purple face. "I am ashamed," he hissed through his teeth. "Ashamed of you. Behaved like—" I'm coming, he yelled, beaming once again. Then he snatched the vase of peonies from the table, and splashing water as he went, left the cell. Cincinnatus kept staring into the book. A drop had fallen on the page. Through the drop, several letters turned from brevier into pica, having swollen as if a reading glass were lying over them. 8. There are some who sharpen a pencil toward themselves as if they were peeling a potato, and there are others who slice away from themselves as though whittling a stick. Rodion was of the latter number. He held an old penknife with several blades and a corkscrew. The corkscrew slept on the outside. "Today is the 8th day," wrote Cincinnatus with a pencil, which had lost more than a third of its length, "and not only am I still alive, that is, the sphere of my own self limits and eclipses my being, but like any other mortal, I do not know my mortal hour, and can apply to myself a formula that holds for everyone. The probability of a future decreases in inverse proportion to its theoretical remoteness. Of course, in my case, discretion requires that I think in terms of very small numbers, but that is all right, I am alive. I had a strange sensation last night, and it is not the first time. I am taking off layer after layer, until at last I do not know how to describe it, but I know this. Through the process of gradual divestment, I reach the final, indivisible, firm, radiant point, and this point says, I am, like a pearl ring embedded in a shark's gory fat. Oh, my eternal, and this point is enough for me. Actually, nothing more is necessary. Perhaps as a citizen of the next century, a guest who has arrived ahead of time, the hostess is not up yet. Perhaps simply a carnival freak in a gaping, hopelessly festive world. I have lived an agonizing life, and I would like to describe that agony to you, but I am obsessed by the fear that there will not be time enough. As far back as I can remember myself, and I remember myself with lawless lucidity, I have been my own accomplice, who knows too much, and therefore is dangerous. I issue from such burning blackness, I spin like a top with such propelling force, such tongues of flame, that to this day I occasionally feel, sometimes during sleep, sometimes while immersing myself in the very hot water, that primordial palpitation of mine, that first branding contact, the mainspring of my eye. How I wriggled out, slippery, naked, yes, from a realm of forbidden and inaccessible to others. Yes, I know something, yes, but even now, when it is all over anyway, even now I am afraid that I may corrupt someone, or will nothing come of what I am trying to tell? It only vestiges, being the corpses of strangled words, like hanged men, even silhouettes of gammas and garoons, gallows crows. I think I should prefer the rope, since I know authoritatively and irrevocably that it shall be the axe. The little time gained, time which is now so precious to me that I value every respite, every postponement, I mean time allotted to thinking, the furlough I allow my thoughts for a free journey from fact to fantasy and return. I mean much more besides, but the lack of writing skill, haste, excitement, weakness, I know something, but an expression of it comes so hard. No, I cannot. I would like to give up, yet I have the feeling of boiling and rising, a tickling which may drive you mad if you do not express it somehow. Oh no, I do not gloat over my own person. I do not get all hot wrestling with my soul in a darkened room. I have no desire, save the desire to express myself in defiance to all the world's muteness. How frightened I am, how sick with fright! But no one shall take me away from myself. I am frightened, and now I am losing some thread, which I held so palpably only a moment ago. Where is it? It has slipped out of my grasp. I am trembling over the paper, chewing the pencil through the lead, hunching over to conceal myself from the door through which a piercing eye stings me from the nape, and it seems I am right on the verge of crumpling everything and tearing it up. I am here through an error, not in this prison specifically, but in the whole terrible striped world, a world which seems not a bad example of amateur craftsmanship, but is in reality calamity, horror, madness, error, and look, the curio slays the tourist. The gigantic carved bear brings its wooden mallet down upon me, and yet ever since early childhood, I have had dreams. In my dreams, the world was ennobled, spiritualized. People whom in the waking state I feared so much appeared there in a shimmering refraction, just as if they were imbued with and enveloped by that vibration of light which in sultry weather inspires the very outlines of objects with life. Their voices, their step, the expressions of their eyes, and even of their clothes acquired an exciting significance. To put it more simply, in my dreams the world would come alive, becoming so captivatingly majestic, free and ethereal that afterwards it would be oppressive to breathe the dust of this painted life. But then I have long since grown accustomed to the thought that what we call dreams is semi-reality, the promise of reality, the foreglimpse and whiff of it, that is, they contain in a very diluted state more genuine reality than our vaunted waking life, which in its turn is semi-sleep, an evil drowsiness into which penetrate in grotesque disguise the sounds and sights of the real world, flowing beyond the periphery of the mind, as when you hear during sleep a dreadful, insidious tale because a branch is scraping on the pane, or you see yourself sinking into snow because your blanket is sliding off. But how I fear wakening! How I fear that second, or rather split second, already cut short, when, with a lumberjack's grunt, but what is there to fear? Will it not be for me simply the shadow of an axe? Shall I not hear the downward vigorous grunt with the ear of a different world? Still I am afraid. One cannot write it off so easily. Neither is it good that my thoughts keep getting sucked into the cavity of the future. I want to think about something else, clarify other things, but I write obscurely and limply like Pushkin's lyrical duelist. Soon I think I shall evolve a third eye on the back of my neck between my brittle vertebrae, a mad eye, wide open, with dilating pupil and pink ventilation on the glossy ball. Keep away, even stronger, more hoarsely, hands off, I can foresee it all. And how often do my ears ring with the sob I am destined to emit, and the terrible gurgling cough uttered by the beheaded tyro. But all of this is not the point, and my discourse on dreams and waking are also not the point. Wait, there, I feel once again that I shall really express myself, shall bring the words to bay. Alas, no one taught me this kind of chase, and the ancient inborn art of writing is long since forgotten. Forgotten are the days when it needed no schooling, but ignited and blazed like a forest fire. Today it seems just as incredible as the music that once used to be extracted from a monstrous pianoforte, music that would nimbly ripple or suddenly hack the world into great gleaming blocks. I myself picture all of this so clearly, but you are not I, and therein lies the irreparable calamity, not knowing how to write, but sensing with my criminal intuition how words are combined, what one must do for a commonplace word to come alive and share its neighbor's sheen, heat, shadow, while reflecting itself in its neighbor, and renewing the neighboring word in the process. So the whole line is live iridescence. While I sense the nature of this kind of word, propinquity, I am nevertheless unable to achieve it, yet it is what is indispensable to me for my task, a task of not now and not here. Not here, the horrible here, the dark dungeon in which a relentlessly howling heart is incarcerated. This here holds and constricts me, but what gleams shine through at night, and what it exists my dream world. It must exist, since surely there must be an original of the clumsy copy. Dreamy, round, and blue, it slowly turns toward me. It is as if you are lying supine, with eyes closed, on an overcast day, and suddenly the gloom stirs under your eyelids, and slowly becomes first a languorous smile, then a warm feeling of contentment, and you know that the sun has come out from behind the clouds. With just such a feeling my world begins. The misty air gradually clears and is suffused with such radiant, tremulous kindness, and my soul expanses so freely in its native realm. But then what? Then what? Yes, that is the line beyond which I lose control. Brought up into the air, the word bursts, as burst those spherical fishes that breathe and blaze only in the compressed murk of the depths when brought up in the act. However, I am making one last effort, and I think I have caught my prey. But it is only a fleeting apparition of my prey. There, tam labas. The gaze of men glows with inimitable understanding. There, the freaks that are tortured here walk unmolested. There, time takes shape according to one's pleasure. like a figured rug whose folds can be gathered in such a way that two designs will meet, and the rug is once again smoothed out and you live on, or else superimpose the next image on the last endlessly, with the leisurely concentration of a woman selecting a belt to go with her dress. Now she glides in my direction, rhythmically butting the velvet with her knees, comprehending everything incomprehensible to me. There are the originals of those gardens, where we used to roam and hide in this world. There everything strikes one by its bewitching evidence, by the simplicity of perfect good. There everything pleases one's soul. Everything is filled with the kind of fun that children know. There shines the mirror that now and then sends a chance reflection here, and what I say is not it, not quite it, and I am getting mixed up, getting nowhere, talking nonsense, and the more I move about and search in the water, where I grope on the sandy bottom for a glimmer I have glimpsed, the muddier the water grows, and the less likely it becomes that I shall grasp it. No, I have yet said nothing, or rather, said only bookish words, and in the end the logical thing would be to give up, and I would give up if I were laboring for a reader existing today, but as there is in the world not a single human who can speak my language, or more simply, not a single human who can speak, or even more simply, not a single human, I must think only of myself, of that force which urges me to express myself. I am cold, weakened, afraid, the back of my head blinks and cringes, and once again gazes with insane intensity, but in spite of everything, I am chained to this table like a cup to a drinking fountain, and will not rise till I have said what I want. I repeat, gathering new momentum in the rhythm of repetitive incantations. I repeat, there is something I know, there is something I know, there is something. When still a child, living in a canary-yellow, large, cold house where they were preparing me and hundreds of other children for secure non-existence as adult dummies, into which all my coevals turned without effort or pain, already then, in those accursed days, amid rag books and brightly painted school materials and soul-chilling drafts, I knew without knowing. I knew without wonder. I knew as one knows oneself. I knew what it is impossible to know, and I would say, I knew it even more clearly than I do now. For life has worn me down, continual uneasiness, concealment of my knowledge, pretense, fear, a painful straining of all my nerves, not to let down, not to ring out. And even to this day I still feel an ache in that part of my memory where the very beginning of this effort is recorded. That is, on the occasion when I first understood that things which to me had seemed natural were actually forbidden, impossible, and any thought of them was criminal. Well, I do remember that day. I must have just learned how to make letters, since I remember myself wearing on my fifth finger the little copper ring that was given to children who already knew how to copy the model words from the flower beds in the school garden, where petunias, phlox, and marigolds spelled out lengthy adages. I was sitting with my feet up on the low windowsill and looking down as my schoolmates, dressed in the same kind of long pink smocks as I, held hands and circled around a beribboned pole. Why was I left out? In punishment? No. Rather the reluctance of the other children to have me in their game, and the mortal embarrassment, shame, and dejection I myself felt when I joined them made me prefer that white nook of the sill, sharply marked off by the shadow of the half-open casement. I could hear the exclamation required by the game, and the strident commands of the red-haired pedagogette. I could see her curls and her spectacles, and with the squeamish horror that never left me, I watched her give the smallest children shoves to make them whirl faster, and that teacher, and the striped pole, and the white clouds now and then letting through the gliding sun, which would suddenly spill out passionate light, searching for something, were all repeated in the flaming glass of the open window. In short, I felt such fear and sadness that I tried to submerge within myself, to slow down and slip out of the senseless life that was carrying me onward. Just then, at the end of the stone gallery where I was sitting, appeared the senior educator. I do not recall his name, a fat, sweaty, shaggy-chested man who was on his way to the bathing place. While still at a distance, he shouted to me, his voice amplified by the acoustics, to go into the garden. He approached quickly and flourished his towel. In my sadness, in my abstraction, unconsciously and innocently, instead of descending into the garden by the stairs, the gallery was on the third floor, not thinking that I was doing, but really acting obediently, even submissively, I stepped straight from the windowsill onto the elastic air, and feeling nothing more than a half sensation of barefootedness, even though I had shoes on, slowly and quite naturally strode forward, still absently sucking and examining the finger in which I had caught a splinter that morning. Suddenly, however, an extraordinary, deafening silence brought me out of my reverie, and I saw below me, like pale daisies, the upturned faces of the stupefied children, and the pedagogette, who seemed to be falling backward. I saw also the globes of the trimmed shrubs, and the falling towel that had not yet reached the lawn. I saw myself, a pink-smocked boy, standing transfixed in mid-air. Turning around, I saw but 3 aerial paces from me the window I had just left, and his hairy arm extended in malevolent amazement. Here, unfortunately, the light in the cell went out. Rodion always turned it off exactly at 10.